As you know, I'm Quentin the Genius, and this will be seconds to the last day on our Python in 10 days. This is day 9, and today we are going to be talking about functions and Lambda expressions in Python. Functions are part of every programming language. We are going to be talking about it today. Lambda expression is a way to write function in a more stylish and very simple and concise manner. If you are joining for the first time, hit on the subscribe button below this video. There's a red subscribe button below this video. Click on it so you subscribe to my channel, and when I make new lessons you get notified. There's also a bell icon below beside the subscribe button as well. There's a notification icon. Click on it as well so that you'll get notified when I make new lessons. And also, I'd like to hear from you. If you have some comments you want to leave for me, let me know how you feel about my lessons. And right now, let's get going. Let's get into the classroom and let's start working with function and Lambda expressions in Python. So today will actually be a day we are going to cover 3 items, and these will be functions, anonymous functions, and modules. So these 3 items we are going to cover today: functions, anonymous functions, and modules. So we start with functions, and as usual it's going to be completely practical class. I do a little housekeeping on the 8th, so I'm going to clean up these. So this is day 9. I'm going to just right click and I'm going to just say new file. So today we are going to be creating 3 files. One is functions. As you know, a function can also be called a subroutine or a subprogram, depending on the way you look at it. So a function is simply a block of code that is executed as a unit. And make no mistake about it, a module is a collection of functions. We are going to be talking about this a little later. Now, Python has many inbuilt functions, but we can also create our own functions, and it's called user-defined functions. Some of these theories are very important for you to know these times. Once you create a function, you can reuse this function in other parts of your program. So if you want something like a function that does a calculation of quadratic equation, or that calculates, let's say, exchange, that uses exchange rate to calculate an amount, you can write it once and use it in different programs. So let's go through all of this. Maybe we can skip some that are not very necessary. So at this point, instead of reading the theories, I'm going to go down to the program. We are going to write a function that calculates the sum of 2 numbers and returns the sum. So as usual, I'm going to write in a comment here that says day 9 of Python in 10 days. Now I want you to be following along as I do it, because at this point, the more you write it yourself, the better. Again, do not copy the code from my website and paste in your IDE. Type it out yourself. So now I'm going to write function to calculate the sum of 2 numbers. Now I'm going to copy because I'm making this lesson, but for you who is learning, try to make sure you type it out yourself. Alright, so the first item in a function is not this one, it's actually def. A function starts with the keyword def, followed by the name of the function, followed by opening brackets specifying the parameters of the function, and followed by a closing bracket, followed by a colon. So under this line I've read out, the next thing for you to do is to now write the function. Now it's possible you can write it also to the same line, but if you do that, it's not going to work. It's not going to be a function. You mess it up and that will be error. So for this to qualify as the body of the function, you need to indent it under this line. So at this point, if I run this code by right clicking and say run, it's going to run quite fine. But as you can see, nothing happens at this point. How do we now use this function, because we are not getting any output? Well, to use this function, we are going to call this function. So it requires that when you call a function, you need to provide the values for it to calculate, because this function calculates a sum So when you are calling this function, you need to provide it with the values you use to actually perform the operation. So if I call this function now, you simply call it by giving it a name, calculate sum, and give it a name, the parameters 10 and 11, or 10 and 10, whatever it is. So at this point we calculate sum, but we can actually just print whatever is the return value. The return value is what a function returns. So when I say print calculate sum at this point is going to give us the output of 10 and 10, or the sum of 10 and 10, and it's going to just print out the output, which is 20. Alright, so at this point I'm going to now use this one here in the website. I'm going to copy it and paste for you. I'll also like to repeat, please type it out by your hand, because the more you type, the more proficient you're becoming in programming. So function to calculate the sum of two numbers, div sum. Okay, I'm going to just delete this. So now if you see, you can see that there are some regular lines right here. So here says 2 lines perspective the sound tree. So giving too much lines in your program and too much empty space is actually not a good practice. So here it says expected 2 blank lines but found 1. I think so. I think it's something like this. So okay, but this is not necessary. It's just some kind of cleanup. So here this function calculates the sum of two numbers and prints it out. So in this case we are saying calculate sum A and B. The sum is str sum. So if I run this code at this point, and is actually going to run this. So this is what is running once you call calculate sum, or when the program encounters this calculate sum here, it's going to go all the way up where the function is defined and actually run that function. What I'm going to try is to move this function down below the calling of this function like this. So if I move it under this place, you can see that first it gives us an error, because before you can use a function, before you can call a function, you actually need to define that function somewhere. So the function has to be defined before you call it. So if you place the function at the end of after the calling code, then it's not going to work. Another thing you need to know is that function definitions can also be done in another place. So I can actually define this function somewhere else in another file and still use it. And that is what we are going to be talking about when we talk about modules, all right? So if I run this program again, you can see that it works perfectly. I would like to recommend write a function that finds the difference between two numbers, the difference, which is minus or subtraction, the multiplication of two numbers, and the division of two numbers. That's the assignment I'm going to give you. So if you scroll up in my website, you can see something you can play around here. If you have some strength, you want something challenging, try to do how to create a simple calculator in Python and see how to write a program that you be able to do different mathematical operations. All right, so let's talk about pass by value and pass by reference. So in this case, in Python, arguments to a function are passed by reference. Now, arguments is similar to parameter. Now, when we have calculate sum a, b, we have the parameters to this function. All right. Now, when you are calling a function here, I have 4, 6 given to this function. These are arguments. Sometimes these things can actually be used interchangeably. There is nothing wrong. So by default, when you give a values to Python, they are passed by reference. So this means that the same variable used in defining a function is referenced when calling a function. So if you change the reference of a parameter within a function, this change is reflected in the calling function. So if I, at this point, if I take, for instance, if I say print a, so is actually not going to work because A is actually defined inside this function. But if I assign A at this point, if I assign A somewhere inside this function, okay, instead of trying to explain it, let's just demonstrate it by using the example in my website. I'm going to just copy and paste, and then we are going to explain it from here. So here I have a function called change list. So this function is going to take this list and then append additional items to the list. All right. So when I'm going to call this function, I'm going to give it my list, and I'm going to call change list and also print out. So the idea is that when we make this change here, so when you have this list one, this one is also a reference to this very parameter being used. So when we are saying list.append, when we are saying list.append, so list one is also pointing to my list. So if we are printing list one at this point, we are printing my list at this point. Both of them are the same because the parameter used for definition of the function, which is list one, is referencing the parameter used for calling the function, or the parameter used in the function call is referencing the parameter used for the definition of the function. So that is what we mean by pass by reference. Both are the same memory location. So basically what we are saying in effect is that my list one used inside the function is the same. It's one and the same thing with my list used for the function call. So this is what we know as pass by reference. All right. So once we print it out, it's going to give us exactly the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, 30, 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, 30. And here we are printing my list, and here we are printing list one. So they are one and the same thing because the argument was passed by reference. All right. So when we are talking about arguments to a function, there are different ways you can specify argument to a function. There are 4 different types. We are going to talk about required argument, keyword argument, default argument, and variable length argument. So the first one is required argument. For instance, if I call change list at this point, as you can see here, if I don't specify change list, then most likely is not going to work because it is a required argument. So arguments that are required argument are those that you must provide to a function unless otherwise you get an error. So when calling full ABC, for example, then you must provide these 3 arguments. So these are required arguments. So when we have this function def print data, and you want to call this function, you must provide this argument. Does it mean that there are some arguments that are optional? Well, let's see. We also have keyword arguments. So this is an interesting one because when you call a function, you use the name of the parameter to identify the argument passed. Okay. This means that you can either skip some argument or even place the argument out of order when calling, but the keywords have to match the name of the parameters used in the function definition. So let's use this to illustrate the keyword argument, how it works. So we are saying that when you create a function and the arguments have to be specified, when you call the function, you need to specify the name of the parameters of the function as part of the argument to the function. So we are having a situation where we have parameter equal to argument. Now, if I paste this, so let's examine this function that says name and age. This is the function name and age, and it specifies 2 parameters, name and age. Let's print out your name is name, your age is age. Now when we are calling this function at this point, we now specify name is equal to Jaden, age is equal to 11, and is the same as saying age is equal to 12, name is equal to Jaden, and in this case we are given the argument to this function out of order, but it still works perfectly. So I'm going to run it at this point. So you can see it runs perfectly. Now, if I specify only one argument, let's say age is equal to 12, we will have an error because in this case, we're only specifying one argument. So what are we talking about? We are talking about keyword argument. Now, in this case, the keyword is the name of the parameter. So in this case, name is a parameter equal to argument. So I have argument. Again, let me just tell you one thing, that you can actually omit the keywords. Let's see, if you take out the keywords at this point, so I'm taking out this keyword and using only the argument, it's also going to work. Now, let me see what happens. See what happens when you specify the parameters out of order. You are going to see that we are not going to be getting the correct result. We are going to be getting one thing. Your name is Jaden. It prints out the first one correctly. And in the case of the second one, it doesn't work because it's expected to be a string. All right. So, all right. So traceback, blah blah blah. Okay. So this is about the keyword argument. Then we also have the default argument. When you define a function, you actually can have some default argument. When the argument is provided as a default argument, that means that you can actually omit this argument. So here we are talking about name and age. We have name, we have age is equal to 13. When we are calling this function and we specify name is equal to Jaden, okay. In this case, we are not providing the age, but then it will still work because it's going to use the default argument. In this case, the default argument is 13. And in this case, if I take out the keyword at this point, we also can have the correct result because we have the default argument specified. And in this case of keyword, you can actually omit the keyword if you want. But keyword actually trying to make a function to be more readable. So we also have the concept of variable length argument that applies to a function defined with lists, tuples, or sets, or even dictionaries. So it's a situation where you need to provide more arguments than are used during the function. To create a variable length argument, you use the star symbol before the name of the argument. So let's try out an example. So we are talking about variable length argument. So if I copy these and paste it, so when we use a particular length in definition or in the function definition, we have scores. Now the question is how many items are in scores, or what type of items are in scores. We do not know. We just define the function. The function is defined using scores. Scores is not been defined in this function. We only specify it right here. So when the function is called, let's say print data, and we are given the scores, it prints it, right? The variable length is provided, okay, which is this. Okay, so the variable length argument is omitted, okay. I'm going to just run it so that we talk about it a little more. All right, so when we call print data, it's going to print student name is Solis and say the scores are given below, and this is for the first one. The second time it is called, it says the student name is Solis and the scores are given below. In this case, the variable length argument is omitted, but the program still works. All right. When we have variable length argument, we provide an asterisk before the name of the parameter. So you can see that variable length argument can be provided or omitted. When provided, it is used, but when it's omitted, it is ignored. So I'd like to recommend you try out a different thing to see what outcome you have. Then there is a concept of global and local variables. So this global and local variable is also very important. So if you have a variable defined inside a function, then the variable will not be available outside that function because it's the local variable. So if I come inside this function and say a is equal to 999, All right, a has been defined inside this function. So if I come down and try to print a, we are going to have a problem because a is defined inside this function. However, if I define a outside this function, for instance, I come here to define a is equal to 999. At this point, I can actually use a inside this function. I can actually say print a. So in this case, a is a global variable at this point. So a is a global variable and it can be used inside any function in this program, in anywhere in this program, because it's outside the body of the function. All right, so let's now move to anonymous functions. So this is an interesting topic. What is this? Let's take it out. So if you want, you can buy me a coffee. I have a buy me a coffee on my website, so feel free to buy me a coffee if this has been informative for you. Now, anonymous function is a bit tricky, but you need to try to understand it. These are functions that does not have a name. Actually, you define them without using the def keyword. Remember, we use def to define a function, but you can use anonymous function without using the def keyword. They can take any number of arguments and return only one value in form of an expression. They can contain multiple expressions or commands. All right, so instead of talking so much about anonymous functions, again, anonymous functions are the same as lambda expressions. So anonymous function in Python is also called lambda expression. So don't forget it. So I'm going to just paste this. All right, so we have a lambda expression that returns the average of three numbers. Now the parameters of this function is num1, num2, and num3, and the name of this function is actually not given. So I can actually remove this average from here. It's also perfectly okay. So I've created a function lambda num1, num2, num3 returns num1, num2 plus num3 over 3. Is also correct. So however, what I'm trying to do is that, let me just undo this backspace. All right, so we are assigning the value returned by this function onto a variable called average. So now you can see that it is just a single line function. The exercise I would like you to try out for yourself is to write a function that calculates the average of three numbers and return the result. You see that it likely will take 3 or 4 lines, but in using anonymous functions or lambda expression, we wrote it in just 1 line. Now, the same function using the normal def, okay, this is what I have right here. Okay, I already did it, so let's just use it as well. So in this case, we have 2 lines. Okay, 2 lines is still okay. So the average of 3 numbers, we use def, average of 3 numbers. So here is 1 line and there is 2. Alright, the lambda expression below will print out the total of 3 numbers. So in this case, we are having a lambda expression that prints out the total of 3 numbers. I'm going to just paste it. So after using lambda expression, how then do we call it? We call it just like every other function. So for instance, I can just say total. Total of 3 numbers, 5, 4, 6. Yeah, so this is perfectly correct. So if I print out at this point, this total 356 is going to give me the total of the 3 numbers. As you can see, 15, right? So why is it giving me none? I don't know. Okay, so let me just. So let's try average of 3 numbers. Average of 3 numbers. 5.0. All right. Okay. So I like to kind of delete these so that let me make sure that it is using the anonymous function I wrote. All right. So it's working. When do you have to use lambda expressions? Lambda expressions, you use it when you are writing very simple functions you need to make this decision yourself, because sometimes Lambda expression might not actually be very, very the best option, because you write something complex in one line of code, to become very difficult to manage or understand. So this is about working with functions in Python. Try to run all these codes by yourself by typing it out by your own hand. The more you type, the more proficient you are. Now let's talk about modules. Before now, I wanted to skip this module as part of advanced topics, but I later added it because I see that modules is very much related to functions in Python. Now, a module is a Python container for codes, right? So you can define functions, classes, and variables inside a module. Let's say you have a function you have written, and this function contains several lines of code, and you want to use them in different files. In this case, you can place the function inside a module. All right, so how do we create a module? Permit me to undo this. So permit me to kind of delete some part of this code, right? All right. So to create a module, you first create a Python file and save it with the name of the module. So let's assume that we have this file called pythons.py. It's called functions.py, okay? So now you write a function inside this file, functions.py. Now inside this file, you can then write the functions and other codes. Now there are modules that are built in. I've talked about it. For example, the maths module contains useful maths function for performing arithmetic, the random module, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. Well, in data science in 10 days, which is what we are going to be doing after this series, we are going to be using modules, inbuilt modules, a lot. All right, so when we have a file that contains functions, for instance, we have this file called functions and it contains module. I can actually create a new file. Let me create a new Python file and let's use this file, functions.py. Let's use it as a module. So let me just call this module test. Okay, that's just a name. You can actually use any name you like. So I'm going to save everything. Okay, it doesn't give us save. So from here, I'm going to say import functions. So once I say import functions at this point, I can actually give it an alias as ft. All right. So once you say import functions, it means that this function file, the content of this function file, will be available inside this current file. So at this point, I can actually say my number is equal to ft.average. Now, when I type ft dot, it gives me the content of the module. So of the ft.average, I now use this function by calling it and then giving it 3 numbers, and I can go ahead to print my. So this works perfectly. The reason is because we are now using a module and it's giving us the average. Now I'd like to write another function inside here, def sum. Let me just call it total. num1, num2, and num3. Just to keep it simple, I could actually write more complex function, but it's okay. Return num1 plus num2 plus num3. Now inside this module called functions, I now have 2 different functions. So okay, so it actually saves automatically. So if I go back to module test, if I go to n2 is equal to ft dot, you can see that it gives me the 2 functions inside. We have total, we have average, which is perfectly good. So actually, yeah, I don't need to refresh anything. It just updates automatically. Just to show how everything works perfectly, let's try out a different one, DEF. DEF. Let's call this difference or multiple. This time we are multiplying num1 times num2 times num3. Remember, since those variables are actually not global variables, define multiple num1 times. Why is it giving me unresolved reference? Oh no, so sorry, I'm going to just specify this as parameters. So I'm going to put the multiplication on that. Alright, so I'm going to just return num1 plus num2 plus num3. So if I go back to the model test and I say entry is equal to ft dot, so you can see that it gives me all the functions in there. Now, what I'm going to try now, I don't know if it will work, but let me just try to see if I can use lambda expression here. So let's say difference is equal to lambda difference between two numbers, num1 and num2, and it's going to return num1 minus num2. All right. So now we've written this lambda expression, and let's try to go to modules to see if we have it there. So I'm going to say ft dot. So you also see that it also gives us lambda expression, as you can see right here. So the question is whether it's going to work. So 4 and 5. So if we print out n3 at this time, n3, we'll see that it also works perfectly. N3 is equal to difference print n3. It gives us 0. So something definitely is not right. So it means that an anonymous function cannot participate in a module. So in this case, the difference is actually not the name of the function. So we can't actually call this function. Yeah. So let me just check something. Let me just kind of try something. I'm gonna print difference 3 and 5. So let's print and see what happens. Okay, so it actually works, but lambda num1 num2 return. Oh, so we have error. Return num1 minus num1. So all right, so everything actually works perfectly. You can actually use anonymous function in a module. So in this case, if I'm trying to find the difference between 8 and 5, and at this point, I'll expect it to return 3, as you can see right here. So anonymous functions can actually be used in a module. Right, so after importing a model, you can use the functions inside. I've mentioned this before. All right, so let's look at another statement called from. The from import statement. Let's say you have a model that contains 100 functions and you want to use only one of them. You don't have to import the whole module. The from import statement allows you to import just a block of code or function from a module. All right. So if you have a module called module name and then the function you want to use is function name, you can simply say from module name import function name. So in this case, let's assume we have all these functions inside this module. So instead of saying import functions, I can say from functions import. At this point, I can say import average, as you can see. And you can now say average num1, num2, num3. So in this case, we are importing only one function from this model. The reason is because some functions can actually span several lines, and some modules can actually be very large in terms of the number of lines of code it contains. So it might not actually make sense to import a module containing tens of functions when you only need only one. In that case, you use from functions import average. I don't know if I can say import function.average. Let me see if it works. So can you say import functions.average? No, you can't say that. So you only say import please. Okay. Import from functions import average. So you can also use the from module import star. So when you use from module import star, you are importing all the functions. From functions import star is also gonna import all the functions from that module. So it's similar to the same as import functions, all right? Right, so locating modules, when you use an import statement, the Python interpreter checks for the module name in the following location, following the order. So for instance, Python paths, we can actually check where the modules are contained. For instance, if I say import maths, the question is where is maths coming from? So I can say maths dot, and I have so many functions inside, but where is this maths function located? So let's try to find it. You can now use sys.path, sys.path. It doesn't work for me, so I can say import OS. I can't remember exactly, and I can say sys.path. It doesn't work. The variable that contains the module search path is sys.path variable. Actually, I would say import sys. Yes. So at this point, I can now print sys.path. So it's gonna tell me where the variables are, the functions are located. So if I run this code at this point, you can see it tells me, can say C users HP PyCharm project day 9, users HP PyCharm project day 9, and say C program files Python 37, Python 37. So in these places, we see that we have the modules located in there. So there are a whole lot of them. Okay, so if you want, you can explore just to check to find out the folder containing your model. This may be necessary something to know, because sometimes when you try to use a module and you don't know exactly where it is, you can actually check if this module is available, is installed in your system. That happens many times when people try to use TensorFlow in data science and they don't actually get that module working. That's what's one of the problems. The dir function is an important built-in function. It returns sorted lists of strings containing the names that are defined in a module. Okay, so in this case, we can actually try it. So if I say print dir and specify the name of the module, dir functions, I'll say functions. Okay, so I should actually import the module first. So I'm going to say import functions, and if I try to print dir functions, so hopefully it's going to give us all the functions defined in this module. So some functions that are I don't really know, you do not really have to worry about all these ones have built-ins, cache, doc. So but we have average, difference, multiple, and total. So you can see the 4 of them that are actually here. Alright, so let's play a little game. Maybe we can kind of print out only the we can try to print out this in different lines, alright? I think it will make some sense. So let's try to say, let's first say that lst equals dir function. So lst now contains the items in the functions module. So can we say for item in lst print item? So in this case, we are printing everything in different lines, so we can see. All right. So how about removing all these ones? How about removing all these ones that are inbuilt? So we can use a for statement. So I'm going to say an if statement to say if item dot starts with an underscore. Like if item that starts with an underscore, let's say, okay, so item dot starts with, can I say if not? If not, okay, if not item dot start with an underscore. So we're only printing for items that doesn't start with an underscore, right? So let's try it out just to see. So you can see that we have only the ones that doesn't start with an underscore. So this is a good practice to remember what you've learned in day 3 or 4. I can't remember when we discussed about conditional statements or making decisions. Then we have the globals, we have the locals. I'll rather say that you don't worry about this. We have the reload function. So the reload kind of refreshes a program using a module to update this program with the new items in the module. Okay, so this is how we come to the end of day 9. I would like to recommend you take some time to get all these things around your head by playing around with all the codes available in my website. Feel free to leave me a comment if you have any challenges following this lesson, because after now we are going to actually be getting into something a bit more challenging when we are going to be talking about data science in 10 days. So if you've come this far, thumbs up to you. And this is just one more to go, which is day 10, where we are going to be talking about reading and writing the file. Again, I remain kind to the genius. If you've not subscribed to my channel, hit the subscribe button below, like and share this video so that we can get the knowledge across to as many people as possible. I'd like to thank you very, very much for viewing.